Hi there, Keith again from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series, Life's Big Questions, looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. When I was growing up, I was slow to learn to read. I had very little interest. People kept trying to give me books that they thought I might find interesting. And at one point, I was given a book by Enid Blyton called The Mystery of the Secret Room. And this was one of a group of kids, the Five Find Outers. That's a great title, isn't it, for a group? And they come across this room in a building which is furnished. The rest of the building is basically desolate. And they immediately realise that there's some criminal activity going on, as you do. And basically, at some point in the novel, one of them breaks into the room to collect clues. And it says at one point, after he's collecting a certain number of clues, he was just so overcome with tiredness, he sits down and he falls asleep. And I thought, oh my word, what an insult to my intelligence. I was probably about 8 at the time. Needless to say, it put me off Enid Blyton. Apologies to those who are fans of hers. And the other thing it didn't do was to get me reading. It took discovering C.S. Lewis to do that. Well, just as one bad plot twist can ruin a book, Solomon here points out in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes that foolishness can ruin everything. Verse 1 of chapter 10, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honour. Even something that's good, if foolishness is involved, it can just go south. It can be ruined. Foolishness here in the Hebrew means to have no skill in living, which really puts it in its context. So Solomon is saying, however good something may look, if a fool is involved, if someone who's not thinking about what they're doing is involved, well, does no good. It's all ruined. And he continues on this theme through a series of proverbs in this chapter. The point he's making here is this, that foolishness is found all over the place, but even, leadership or status, it doesn't protect people from foolishness. He has a lot to say. He says, even as he walks along the road, the fool lacks sense and shows everyone how stupid he is. But that's not just, the common or garden form. There's another sort. I have seen an evil I have seen under the sun. The sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in high positions while the rich occupy low ones. I've seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves. Solomon has the ability, as we've seen in this book, to stand back and take a long, hard look at what is going on. In fact, he's almost put on the hat of a commoner several times. And perhaps when he sort of steps back and he looks at his administration, there's people in places perhaps they shouldn't be, or he perhaps is looking at kings from the surrounding area and he sees folly in the place of leadership. Foolishness also sometimes has a very high opinion of itself. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but a fool is consumed by his own lips. I used to have a neighbour, and he used to like to talk to me about religion, as he put it. The trouble was this, he liked to talk. He didn't like to listen. He actually said to me once, I'm far more likely to influence you than you are to influence me. And I thought, well, that's a great way to start a conversation. Really get someone on your side, doesn't it? And so he'd talk, and I'd try and say, well, actually, in answer to that question, he'd start something else. And one time I actually said, I'll tell you what, I knew him well enough to say this. You shut up and I'll answer the question, then we can move to the next subject. That's the sort of situation we sometimes find ourselves in. People have a very high opinion of themselves. They use many words, but they add up to absolutely nothing. Back to the theme of leadership again, verse 16. Woe to you, O land, whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. George IV was called England's first gentleman, but the person who actually called him that actually said he was witty and eloquent, whether drunk or sober. You see, George wasn't much of a king, to put it mildly. I remember when I was researching, when I preached for Ecclesiastes, someone once witnessed his breakfast, and it was about a 5-course meal at that stage in the day. He was a glutton. He wasn't highly thought of. And basically, he was summed up in this way: he preferred a girl and a bottle rather than a good sermon. He wasn't one to listen. He was one who really just indulged himself. As Proverbs often go, there's often an upside. Verse 17, blessed are you, O land, whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at the proper time for the strength and not for drunkenness. You know, the nation only really existed or did well under George because it had a good prime minister at the time. Wisdom is not necessarily the prerogative of those who lead, rather sadly. What is better is to, as Solomon has said before, look at what God has given in life. A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes life merry, but money is the answer for everything. You might be surprised about that. After all, isn't money meant to be the root of all evil? The trouble is, we've been listening to Pink Floyd a bit too much. I love the track Money, but their theology is off. The love of money is the root of all evil. The issue is this, that money can be used for many good things, and Solomon sees that God has given enjoyment in life. But he warns again as he ends this chapter to be careful. Verse 20, do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird of the air may carry your words. A bird on the wing may report what you say. Phrase, a little bird told me so. Well, now you know where it came from. So enjoy life, but be moderate and sensible. But once again, we're left, and I think Solomon intends us to be left, with the fact that life is very, very inconsistent. It's not the way we'd want it, or we'd like to design it for perfect running. That might surprise us. We might expect Solomon to give us the answer. What is the answer? Well, he's been hinting at it throughout the book. And it's this, isn't it? We find it in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. If we want to make sense of life, then we have to look to God. We have to start with him. And actually, once we get that right, we see that there is much in life to enjoy. How are we going to do that? Are we going to go on some quest? Are we going to climb some mountain? Are we going to sit cross-legged and meditate for a bit? It's simpler than that. The writer to the Hebrew Christians of the first century writes this: in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. You want to know what God's like? Look at Jesus Christ. Look at his life. Look at his teaching. And look at what he came to do. Life may be inconsistent. Ecclesiastes has told us that life is a mess. We live, as I've said in previous talks, in a Genesis 3 world, a world damaged by sin, but Christ is the remedy for sin. So I leave you with a challenge. Engage with Jesus Christ. Pick up a Bible. Dust it off. I'd recommend starting at the Gospel of Mark. Read that through. It's an easy read. And there you see true wisdom. And if you haven't got a gospel, I will gladly send you one. Or if you'd like, you don't feel you're quite there yet, I'd like you to read a little book which I can offer you called The Real Jesus. And there's details with this talk on how to contact me for that. Thanks again for listening.